Arab executive throws his pregnant African wife off a bridge until the horse manages to do this. He was powerful, untouchable, a billionaire who controlled everything except his own dark impulses. When his pregnant wife became an inconvenience, he made a choice that no one could undo, or so he thought. One night, beneath the cold glow of the city lights, he did the unthinkable, pushing her over the edge of a towering bridge, believing she would never be seen again. But fate had other plans. What he didn't expect was that a horse would change everything. And when she returns, no longer the helpless woman he abandoned, she's not looking for mercy. She's looking for revenge. Stay until the end, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories like this one. Now, let's dive into the shocking tale. The city lights flickered over the bridge, their reflection dancing on the dark waters below. The air was thick with humidity, and the muffled sounds of distant traffic barely reached the isolated spot where Khalid Al-Fayez stood, his hands gripping the trembling shoulders of his wife, Amina. Amina's breath came in ragged gasps. Her dark, tear-streaked eyes searched his face, desperate for a sliver of the man she had once loved, the man who had whispered promises under the moonlight, who had held her close and vowed to protect her. But that man was gone. "Khalid, please," she sobbed, one hand protectively cradling her swollen belly. "You don't have to do this." His jaw tightened. The storm inside him raged silently, but his face remained carved in stone. He had made his decision. There was no turning back. "You should have listened," he murmured coldly. "You should have obeyed." Amina's knees buckled, but he held her firm. The wind howled around them, tugging at her thin dress, as if nature itself was rebelling against what was about to happen. She knew why he was doing this. She had become an inconvenience, a liability. Khalid had built his empire from the ground up, clawing his way to the top of the financial world. His wealth was immeasurable, his power unquestionable. But in his world, image was everything. And a child with a woman like her, a woman who did not fit the mold of his pristine legacy, was something he could not afford. Amina had seen the shift in him long before this night. The cold glances, the silence, the nights spent away, and then, finally, the threats. But she had never believed he would take it this far. "Khalid, I love you," she whispered, clinging to his hands. "I love you, and this baby is a part of you, a part of us." Something flickered in his eyes, something human, but it was gone in an instant. His grip tightened. "No," he said simply, and then he let go. The scream that tore from her lips was swallowed by the wind as she plummeted into the abyss. The black waters of the river rushed to meet her, cold and merciless. Her body hit the surface with a force that stole the air from her lungs, sending a jolt of agony through her spine. The darkness enveloped her, pulling her under, and for a moment she knew nothing but pain and silence. Was this how it ended? Was this where her story stopped? No. Amina's hands clawed at the water, fighting to break the surface, but the current was relentless. Her lungs burned, her limbs grew heavy. The weight of her unborn child, once a source of love, now felt like an anchor pulling her deeper. And then, through the haze of her fading consciousness, she saw it. A shadow moved above her, rippling against the surface. A snort, a splash, the glint of dark eyes piercing the gloom. A horse. It was massive, its muscular body cutting through the water with ease. She barely registered the feel of teeth gripping the fabric of her dress, dragging her upward with a strength she could not comprehend. The world exploded into light as she was yanked from the depths, coughing and gasping for air. The horse swam with powerful strokes, its body guiding them toward the riverbank. Amina clung to its mane, her body weak, her mind swimming between consciousness and oblivion. As her feet finally touched the muddy shore, she collapsed onto the wet ground, her chest rising and falling in desperate breaths. The horse stood beside her, its nostrils flaring, watching her with an intelligence that sent a shiver through her battered body. Somehow, against all logic, she was alive, and Khalid had no idea. Amina's fingers curled into the dirt. The pain in her body was nothing compared to the fire now burning in her soul. He had thrown her away like she was nothing. But she would return, and when she did, he would regret the night he thought she was gone forever. Amina's body ached with every movement. The sharp pain in her ribs reminded her that she was still alive. Her soaked dress clung to her like a second skin, heavy with the weight of the river. She lay motionless on the muddy bank, struggling to catch her breath, while the massive horse that had saved her stood nearby, its dark eyes fixed on her. The animal was unlike anything she had ever seen up close. A magnificent, powerful stallion with a sleek black coat that glistened under the pale moonlight. It shook its head, sending droplets of water flying in every direction, then took a cautious step closer. Amina forced herself to move, pushing up on trembling arms. Her mind was still reeling. Why had this horse saved her? Where had it come from? Her body screamed in protest as she shifted, and a sudden panic surged through her. She placed both hands over her belly, searching for movement. The baby. Was he still alive? Tears burned in her eyes as she waited, pressing her palm gently against her stomach, willing herself to feel something, anything. Then, just as fear threatened to consume her, a soft kick. Weak, but there. A sob of relief escaped her lips. "You're still with me," she whispered. The horse let out a deep exhale, as if understanding her words. Amina wiped the water from her face, forcing her thoughts to settle. She was alive, and so was her child. But Khalid believed otherwise. A shudder ran through her at the memory. His cold hands on her shoulders, his unreadable expression, and then the moment he let go. She had loved him once, truly, deeply. She had trusted him, and he had thrown her away like she was nothing. Rage flickered inside her, weak but growing. No, she would not be nothing. She would not disappear. A sudden noise broke through the stillness, a distant barking, followed by voices. Amina's pulse quickened. Someone was coming. She couldn't be found. Not yet. If word got out that she had survived, Khalid would find a way to finish what he started. The horse snorted and turned its head toward the approaching sounds. Without thinking, Amina reached for its thick mane. "Please," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was asking. But the animal seemed to understand. It lowered its head, allowing her to grip tighter. Using every ounce of strength left in her battered body, she pulled herself up. Her legs wobbled beneath her weight, but the horse didn't move, allowing her to lean against its side. Somewhere in the distance, a flashlight beam cut through the night. Amina's heart pounded. If they saw her, they would ask questions. The police would be called, and then Khalid. She had to leave, now. Swallowing her fear, she placed one foot into the riverbank's soft dirt and pulled herself onto the horse's back. It should have been impossible. She had never ridden a horse before. But the stallion didn't resist. As soon as she settled onto its broad back, it moved. With powerful strides, the horse carried her away from the riverbank into the darkness of the trees beyond. She clung to its mane, fighting against the exhaustion that threatened to drag her under. The wind rushed past her face, chilling her wet skin. She had no idea where they were going, but she knew one thing for certain. She was not supposed to be alive, and that was her greatest weapon. Khalid would sleep soundly tonight, convinced that his past had been erased. But she would return, and when she did, she would make sure he felt every ounce of the pain he had tried to bury beneath the water. For now, she had to survive. The trees blurred together as the horse carried her deeper into the unknown. She closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of its gallop steady her heartbeat. A storm was coming, and this time, she would be the one standing on the bridge. The rhythmic pounding of the horse's hooves against the damp earth was the only sound cutting through the night. Amina clung to the stallion's thick mane, her body trembling from exhaustion and the cold. The further they rode from the river, the deeper they plunged into darkness, the dense forest swallowing them whole. She had no idea where the horse was taking her, but she had no choice but to trust it. Her mind raced despite the overwhelming fatigue. Khalid thought she was dead. He had thrown her away, and now she had the chance to use that to her advantage. But she was weak, injured, and alone. She couldn't face him yet. She needed time. She needed strength. The horse slowed as they entered a clearing. Amina's vision blurred, her body swaying as exhaustion threatened to consume her. She couldn't hold on much longer. As if sensing her distress, the horse came to a gradual stop near an old wooden structure, a small barn, barely visible in the moonlight. The scent of hay and damp earth filled her nose as the horse gently nudged her side with its massive head, urging her to move. Amina slid off, collapsing onto her knees as pain shot through her body. Her stomach twisted in agony, and she instinctively wrapped her arms around herself, protecting the life inside her. She had to be strong, for both of them. The horse remained by her side, lowering its head as if waiting for her to stand. Amina ran her fingers through its wet mane, whispering, "Thank you." Her voice was weak, but the gratitude was real. With trembling limbs, she forced herself up and stumbled toward the barn. The wooden door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Inside, the space was small but dry. A pile of hay in the corner promised some warmth, and Amina wasted no time, collapsing onto it. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind refused to quiet. Khalid's face haunted her. His voice, his touch, the way his hands had gripped her before letting go. Her fingers curled into fists. He would pay for what he had done. But first, she needed to survive. Her stomach twisted again, a sharp pain cutting through her side. Panic gripped her. The baby. Was something wrong? She forced herself to take slow, deep breaths. Her body had been through a shock, but she had felt the baby move earlier. He was strong. He had to be. Amina placed a protective hand over her belly and closed her eyes. Rest. She needed rest. The last thing she saw before exhaustion claimed her was the silhouette of the horse standing just outside the barn, standing guard over her. The sound of voices snapped her awake. Amina's eyes shot open, her heart pounding. Sunlight streamed through the barn's gaps, warming her skin. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then, reality came crashing back. The bridge, the fall, the horse, Khalid. She pushed herself up, her muscles aching from the night before. The voices outside grew closer. Peeking through a crack in the wooden wall, she saw them. 2 men, dressed in simple clothes, walking toward the barn. Farmers. They looked harmless, but Amina knew better than to trust anyone. She glanced toward the entrance. The horse was gone. Had it belonged to them? Would they be looking for it? Panic surged through her. If they found her, they would ask questions. If word spread, Khalid might hear about a woman found near the river. She couldn't let that happen. With slow, quiet movements, she crawled toward the back of the barn, searching for another way out. Amina's breath caught as she spotted a small opening between the wooden planks. It was narrow, but she could squeeze through. She had to move fast. The voices were just outside the door now. "She must be in here," one man said. Amina's blood ran cold. Were they looking for her? She forced herself through the gap, biting her lip to keep from crying out as the rough wood scraped her skin. Her feet hit the ground outside just as she heard the barn door creak open behind her. Holding her breath, she pressed herself against the wall, listening. "What the hell?" one of the men muttered. "Tracks. Hoof prints. Someone was here." Amina didn't wait to hear more. She ran. Every step sent a jolt of pain through her body, but she didn't stop. She darted into the trees, her heart hammering in her chest. She had to get away. She had to disappear. Somewhere in the distance, a familiar sound reached her ears. A low, steady snort. The horse. Hope flickered in her chest. She wasn't alone, and she wasn't giving up. Amina ran. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her legs weak beneath her, but she didn't stop. The voices behind her faded as she plunged deeper into the forest, pushing past tangled branches and uneven ground. Pain tore through her ribs, but fear pushed her forward. She couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. The sound of hoofbeats echoed in the distance. She turned her head just enough to catch a glimpse of the black stallion standing between the trees, watching her. Relief flooded her. The horse had not abandoned her. It had been waiting. Amina staggered toward it, her fingers reaching for its thick mane as she collapsed against its powerful frame. She didn't know how or why this animal had chosen to stay with her, but she was grateful. It was the only thing keeping her alive. A sharp whistle cut through the trees. She froze. The farmers were close. They were searching for someone. Her. If they found her, they would ask questions. And if word spread that a woman had been pulled from the river, Khalid would know. Amina had no choice. She grabbed a fistful of the horse's mane and pulled herself up. Every muscle in her body protested, but she ignored the pain. The stallion shifted beneath her, sensing her urgency, then took off the moment she was secure. The wind rushed past her face as they sped through the forest. Leaves and branches blurred into streaks of green and brown. She held on with everything she had, her mind racing as fast as the horse beneath her. Where could she go? Who could she trust? Khalid had severed every connection she had. The life she had once known was gone, erased with the push of his hands. She had no money, no shelter, no allies. She was a ghost. But ghosts had power. She clung to that thought as the trees began to thin. Ahead, a dirt road cut through the landscape, leading toward something, anything. The stallion slowed, nostrils flaring, ears twitching. It was waiting for her next move. Amina slid off its back, landing unsteadily on her feet. She placed a hand over her belly, steadying herself. The baby was still there, still fighting, just like her. In the distance, smoke curled into the sky. A small farmhouse sat nestled between the hills, its chimney releasing soft plumes into the air. A sign near the road read, St. Helena Rescue and Rehabilitation. Amina's heart pounded. A horse rescue center. It was a risk, but she had no choice. She needed shelter. She needed help. With a deep breath, she took a step forward, only for her legs to give out beneath her. She hit the ground hard. Darkness clawed at the edges of her vision. The world tilted. The last thing she saw before her eyes shut was the stallion standing over her, its massive body shielding her from the open sky. Then, everything went black. Voices, soft, murmuring, close. Amina's eyelids fluttered open. A ceiling, wooden beams, the scent of hay and antiseptic filled her lungs. Slowly, she turned her head. She was in a bed, a small, simple one with a wool blanket pulled over her. Sunlight streamed through a nearby window, illuminating the room in golden light. Where am I? Movement caught her eye. A woman, tall, blonde, dressed in faded jeans and a flannel shirt, stood near the doorway, arms crossed. "You're awake," the woman said. Her voice was cautious, but not unkind. Amina tried to sit up, but pain shot through her ribs, forcing her back down. "Take it easy," the woman said, stepping closer. "You were in bad shape when we found you. Do you remember what happened?" Amina's throat was dry. She hesitated. What could she say? That her billionaire husband tried to kill her? That she was supposed to be dead? She settled on a half-truth. "I fell into the river," she rasped. The woman's gaze flickered with doubt, but she didn't push. "My name's Claire. I run this place. We found you just outside the property. Well, not me, actually. Him." She gestured toward the window. Amina turned her head just enough to see outside. There, standing in the sunlight, was the black stallion. Her breath caught. "He hasn't left since you got here," Claire said, watching her carefully. "It's like he was guarding you. Do you know that horse?" Amina swallowed hard. "He saved me." Claire's eyebrows lifted, but she didn't question it. Instead, she pulled a chair closer and sat. "Listen, I don't know who you are or where you came from, but I can see you're scared. If you need a place to rest, you can stay here for a while. No questions asked." Amina's fingers curled into the blanket. Could she trust her? She had no other options. She nodded slowly. "Thank you." Claire offered a small smile, but her eyes remained sharp. "Get some rest. We'll talk more later." As she left the room, Amina turned her gaze back to the stallion outside. He had saved her once, and now he had brought her here. She didn't know why, but she knew one thing. She wasn't done yet, and neither was her fight. Amina lay in bed, staring at the wooden ceiling as the weight of everything settled on her chest. She should be dead. Khalid had made sure of that. But she wasn't. And the longer she remained alive, the more dangerous it became for him. Her fingers traced the soft fabric of the blanket, mind racing. Khalid would find out sooner or later. He had resources, power, and enough influence to erase any loose ends. She had to stay hidden, at least until she was strong enough to decide her next move. Outside, the rhythmic pounding of hooves echoed across the open land. The black stallion, her savior. Amina slowly pushed herself up, wincing as pain shot through her ribs. The soreness in her body reminded her of how close she had come to dying. She had no idea how long she had been unconscious, but her stomach growled, a sharp reminder that she needed food. Carefully, she swung her legs over the edge of the bed and tested her strength. Her body felt fragile, but she had no choice. She couldn't afford to be weak. The wooden floor was cool beneath her bare feet as she moved toward the door. The small cabin smelled of fresh hay and something warm. Soup? She followed the scent, stepping cautiously into the main area of the house. Claire was at the stove, stirring a pot. She turned when she heard Amina's footsteps, her blue eyes scanning her with quiet concern. "You're up." Amina nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious. She was wearing an oversized flannel shirt, likely something Claire had given her while her own clothes dried. Claire ladled soup into a bowl and set it on the table. "You should eat." Amina hesitated, but hunger won. She sat down and lifted the spoon with trembling fingers, bringing the warm broth to her lips. The heat spread through her, soothing and grounding. "You're safe here," Claire said, sitting across from her. "But I need to know, are you in trouble?" Amina's grip on the spoon tightened. Claire didn't press. "Look, I don't need the full story. But if someone's after you, I need to know what we're dealing with." Amina glanced toward the window. The stallion stood outside, grazing, its powerful frame silhouetted against the rising sun. A part of her wanted to trust Claire. She had been nothing but kind, but trust had nearly cost Amina her life once before. She met Claire's gaze. "I need to disappear." Claire studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I can help with that." Amina's breath caught. "You can?" Claire leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You're not the first person who's shown up here needing a fresh start. We're off the grid. No one comes out this way unless they know about us. If you need time, you've got it." Relief mixed with suspicion. "Why would you help me?" Claire shrugged. "I've seen enough women run from things they shouldn't have had to. I don't ask questions. I just help." Amina swallowed hard, emotion tightening in her throat. She had spent so long feeling alone, unwanted. This kindness felt foreign. But she couldn't stay forever. She needed to get stronger. And then she needed to go back. Khalid thought he had erased her, that he had buried his past at the bottom of the river. He was wrong. And when she returned, she wouldn't be the same woman he had tried to destroy. She would make him pay. Amina placed the spoon down and looked Claire in the eye. "Teach me how to survive." Claire smirked. "I was hoping you'd say that." The sun was high in the sky as Amina stood outside the barn, the dry dirt beneath her bare feet warm from the midday heat. The black stallion stood a few feet away, watching her with the same piercing gaze he always had, as if he understood more than he should. She had been at Claire's rescue center for 3 days now, regaining her strength, eating, resting, but most importantly, learning. Claire had kept her word. No questions, no pressure. But she had also made it clear. If Amina wanted to disappear, she needed to prepare. Survival isn't just about hiding, Claire had said that morning, tossing Amina a pair of worn leather gloves. It's about making sure that when the time comes, you can fight back. And that's what they had been doing ever since. Amina wiped sweat from her brow, her muscles aching from the morning's training. Claire had put her to work, teaching her how to move unnoticed, how to track movement in the woods, and even how to handle a knife. But the hardest lesson was learning how to ride. She turned her gaze back to the stallion. He had saved her, carried her through the forest when she had been too weak to move. But now she needed more than just his protection. She needed to control her own fate. Claire approached, her steady presence grounding Amina's swirling thoughts. "You ready?" Amina inhaled deeply and nodded. "Yes." Claire patted the stallion's strong neck. "He trusts you, you know. I can see it. But trust goes both ways. If you want him to carry you into the fire, You have to show him that you won't let go." Amina swallowed hard. She wasn't afraid of the horse. She was afraid of failing. Taking a steadying breath, she gripped the stallion's mane and pulled herself onto his back. The horse didn't move, standing still beneath her as she adjusted her position. "Good," Claire said. "Now, make him move." Amina hesitated. "How?" "Talk to him. Use your legs, your hands. Show him you're in charge." Amina pressed her heels gently into the stallion's sides. "Go," she whispered. Nothing. Claire chuckled. "You've got to be firmer than that. He's a warrior, not a puppy." Amina tried again, this time straightening her back, tightening her grip. "Move," she commanded. The stallion snorted, then, as if finally satisfied with her resolve, he began to walk. A rush of adrenaline shot through her. She was doing it. "Good," Claire called out. "Now keep going." The horse picked up speed, his powerful body surging forward. Amina gritted her teeth, adjusting to the movement, feeling the rhythm of his gallop beneath her. The wind whipped against her face, her heart hammering in her chest. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel helpless. She felt powerful. She guided the stallion around the training yard, growing more confident with every passing second. When she finally slowed him to a stop, her chest was heaving, her face flushed, but she was smiling. Claire approached, nodding approvingly. "That's more like it." Amina ran her fingers through the stallion's mane, whispering, "Thank you." The horse let out a low huff, nudging her knee as if acknowledging her gratitude. Claire crossed her arms. "You're getting stronger, but riding is just one part of this. If you're really serious about facing whatever's waiting for you out there, you need more than just speed." Amina met her gaze. "Then teach me." Claire smirked. "All right, warrior princess, let's get to work." That night, Amina lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling of the cabin. Her body was sore, but she welcomed the pain. It meant she was alive. It meant she was ready. Khalid thought she was dead. He believed he had erased her from existence. But he had no idea what was coming for him. She turned her head toward the window, where the stallion stood beneath the moonlight, his dark coat gleaming. Her time was coming. And when she returned, she wouldn't just be a survivor. She would be his reckoning. The cold night air wrapped around Amina as she stood outside the barn, her heart pounding against her ribs. The black stallion stood beside her, his deep breaths visible in the moonlight. The past week had transformed her. Her body was stronger, her mind sharper. She was no longer the broken woman who had clawed her way out of the river. She was ready. Claire leaned against the wooden fence, arms crossed, watching her closely. "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" Amina nodded. "I can't stay hidden forever." Claire sighed. "I figured. You don't strike me as the type to run away." She hesitated, then added, "But whatever you're planning, be smart about it. Don't let revenge make you reckless." Amina tightened her grip on the stallion's reins. Revenge isn't reckless when it's the only way to survive. Claire didn't argue. She simply handed Amina a small bundle, money, clothes, and a knife. "I can't stop you, but I can make sure you have a chance." Amina swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the kindness she didn't deserve. "Thank you." Claire gave her a small smirk. "Just promise me one thing. If you get the chance to walk away, take it." Amina didn't respond. She climbed onto the stallion's back, feeling the steady power beneath her. She had spent days training, riding, preparing for this moment. Now, there was no more time to hesitate. With a final glance at Claire, she nudged the horse forward, and just like that, she disappeared into the night. The city lights glowed in the distance, growing closer with every stride. Amina had spent years in this world, luxury, wealth, power, but now she was an outsider, slipping through the cracks like a ghost. She wore a hooded jacket Claire had given her, her dark curls tucked beneath the fabric. She had studied Khalid's schedule for days, using every memory she had of his habits. He believed he had buried her. He had no reason to be cautious. That would be his downfall. The stallion had carried her as far as the city limits, but she had left him behind in a safe place. This was something she had to do alone. Her footsteps were silent as she walked toward Khalid's estate. The towering walls surrounding his mansion loomed ahead, the gates guarded by 2 men in dark suits. He was still careful, still paranoid. Good. Amina knew the estate well. She had once called it home, and she knew the one place no one would be watching, the servants' entrance in the back, hidden behind the hedges. She crept through the shadows, her body tense, her pulse steady. She had prepared for this moment. Every step was deliberate, every breath controlled. And then she was inside. The house was just as she remembered. Marble floors, gold accents, the scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. But it no longer felt like home. It felt like a graveyard. Footsteps echoed from down the hall. Amina pressed herself against the wall, her pulse quickening. Then she heard it. His voice. Khalid. She peered around the corner. He stood in the grand living room, dressed in an expensive suit, sipping whiskey as he spoke on the phone. Yes, it's done, he said smoothly. She's gone. No loose ends. Amina's grip tightened on the knife hidden beneath her jacket. You're wrong, Khalid. There is one. For the first time in weeks, a small smile touched her lips. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Amina's breath was steady, but her heart pounded as she crept closer. Khalid had his back turned, still speaking on the phone, completely unaware. She could end this now. One quick strike, one moment of justice. Her fingers tightened around the knife. Then his voice cut through the silence. Her body was never found? Doesn't matter. She's dead. Amina smiled. No, I'm not. She stepped forward, just enough for her presence to be felt. Khalid turned. His glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. His face drained of color. No, that's impossible. Amina pulled back her hood, letting him see her fully, letting him feel the weight of his mistake. Did you miss me, husband? His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, Khalid al-Fayez was afraid, and Amina intended to make sure he stayed that way. Khalid stumbled backward, his breath shallow, his eyes locked onto Amina as if she were a ghost. This isn't possible. Amina took a slow step forward. Let him feel the fear. Let him drown in it. You threw me away, she whispered. You thought the river would take me. Khalid's jaw clenched, but the panic in his eyes betrayed him. What do you want? Amina tilted her head. Justice. He lunged for the desk drawer, where she knew he kept a gun. But Amina was faster. She kicked the drawer shut, slamming it on his fingers. Khalid let out a sharp cry, staggering back. Did it feel this way when you let go? She asked, her voice deadly quiet. Khalid gritted his teeth. Amina, don't say my name. She stepped closer, pressing the blade of her knife just beneath his chin. His body tensed. Sweat beaded on his forehead. She could do it. Right now. End him. But then, she felt it. A flutter in her stomach. Her baby. A reminder. She wasn't just fighting for revenge. She was fighting for a future. Amina lowered the knife, stepping back. Khalid gasped, realizing she wasn't going to kill him. But she smiled. That was worse. "I don't have to destroy you," she said. "You'll do that yourself." Before he could react, she turned and walked away. The past was behind her, and the future, it was hers.